It's not a story for one type of person. And I think that's what's so wonderful about the Equiano story. Yes, he's an enslaved African. And yes, there are many people that will relate to the narrative and the ideas behind that part of his story. But as I said, he's also an entrepreneur. He was also an author. He was also a freedom fighter.
I felt that this brand had to speak to as many people as possible, because I always say we want to make a rum for the many and not for the few. So if we look at the rums in the Caribbean, the island that's making a lot of noise, making some great liquid, great juice, versatile, is Barbados. And in regards to the story, that's where rum got its name from.
This is Hotspot, an On the Pass series, where we highlight some of the hottest emerging brands and the people behind them. Welcome back, On the Pass listeners. Gabriel here, back with another Hotspot episode highlighting some of the most exciting emerging brands and leaders. If you follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn, you may have seen recently we curated and hosted the Freedom of Spirit private dining experience in collaboration with Chef Jazzy Harvey and our good friends at the Equiano Rum Company. Chef Jazzy artfully crafted a menu that took inspiration from both Juneteenth and Olaudah Equiano, a freed slave whose spirit and determination played a pivotal role in the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. Olaudah's freedom and spirit lives on today through the Equiano Rum Company. But first, listen. I'm currently looking at the back-end data of our show, and there's about 48% of you that listen but still haven't hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. What are we waiting for? Come on. Do me a favor, and as I've said before, I'll only ever ask you for one thing. Hit that follow button so you can keep up with all our upcoming and past episodes. And if you enjoy our episodes, give us a 5-star rating so more people like you can discover us and enjoy. We recently released On the Pass episode 107 with restaurateur and travel enthusiast Jonathan Cano. Born and raised in Lima, Peru, Jonathan always had a deep yearning to discover the world. He's a partner and head of operations at Hive Hospitality, alongside celebrated chef Ryan Rotino, and is well known for his travels and passion for fine dining. He tells me it's more than just food. It's an emotive, therapeutic experience. I highly encourage you to listen to this episode and keep up with all his travels. Our next guests are Ian Burrell and Aaisha Dadral, co-founders of the Equiano Rum Company, makers of the world's first African and Caribbean rums. Fun fact, in January 2020, Ian and I recorded an episode for the podcast in the Cayman Islands at the Cayman Cookout. But the audio was so bad due to technical issues, sadly we never released it. So it's exciting that almost 5 years later, we're able to reconnect and discuss how he and his partners are bringing the Equiano brand to life. Ian, also known as the Global Rum Ambassador, has spent the last few decades entertaining and educating the world about the diverse and exciting category of rum. He's the creator of the UK RumFest, which has inspired the birth of numerous other rum festivals around the world. And he's one of the most traveled and well-known figures in the rum category. Aaisha is a branding and marketing executive who cut her teeth in the music industry at major record labels like Island Records, Mercury, Def Jam Records, and Levels Entertainment. She's also the founder of brand studio Crave. Together, along with their partner Amanda, the three of them have set out to make their mark not only on the category of rum, but in the global spirits industry. Taking inspiration from the iconic Olaudah Equiano, his journey and story from slavery to freedom, they've brought the world's first African and Caribbean rum to market, giving a percentage of the profits to freedom and equality organizations annually. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ian Burrell and Aaisha Dadral, co-founders of the Equiano Rum Company. On episode 69 of On the Pass, we had Fawn Weaver, innovative CEO of Uncle Nearest. And she said, the story of Uncle Nearest is so extraordinary. The only other story that rivaled it is a story of Equiano. So I wanted to start there. And I would love for you both to Talk a little bit about that story and a bit about the inspiration behind the name, and then talk a little bit about the man, Olaudah Equiano.
Yeah, well, I mean, the actual story of Olaudah Equiano is one that it's a disservice to actually to talk about only a small amount of what he's done, because he's been such an important person for a lot of people that didn't even know he existed, for some of the things he did. So to bring his story to life was an honor for all of us as a team to actually be a part of that journey. But we also had to be mindful that we were just part of the story and not the story. As such, we've created a rum brand. We've adorned his name. We searched as much as we could for family members. There aren't any family members that we could actually get involved with the project, or we can actually basically get like the nod of approval to use his name and to spread his name. So that's another reason why we've taken upon ourselves to make sure that we tread carefully when we do speak about him in relation to our rum brand. But the man himself was an inspiration to a lot of people that around the time when he lived during the 18th century. He was born in about 1765 and then died in 1797. But in that time, he had endured, succeeded, inspired millions of people through just being a pillar of strength, first being an anomaly, as in this young African kid that learned English so quickly, learned about religion at a particular time when, of course, religion was one of the most important things in the world at a particular time. Learned how to use his knowledge of traveling to the Caribbean and seeing other Africans that were in a worse position than he was, using that knowledge there to come back to England to inspire abolitionists in England and also in Americas as well, because people did communicate, although we didn't have the internet back then, but there were ships and there were ports and there were people traveling from here to there. And he was one of the best, which is why he rose to prominence at a very young age, because he was good in the ships. He was good at navigating. But his story started when he was kidnapped from Africa when he was 11. He grew up in a family, had a sister who was also taken at the same time. Unfortunately, he was never, ever got to see her again. He was sold into servitude, first in Barbados and then in Virginia. And then from Virginia, he then came over to the UK. And all this in the space of a year from his 11th birthday. And in that time, he had already started to basically show his strength as a future leader. Even his captives renamed him Gustavo, which was a Swedish king at that particular time, Gustavo Vasa. So he went to England under that name, learned English, was baptized as well, understood about navigation, and then sailed on various ships. Even was in ships in the 7 Years' War between the French, fighting the French, the British fighting the French. But going back to the Caribbean and seeing that, but what really inspired me when I first heard about him in weekend school. It wasn't school like the national curriculum. It was the weekend school. My mum, being a proud Jamaican person, growing up in England, forced me to go to African studies because it wasn't taught in school. And that's where I learned about Olaudah Equiano. And the thing that really got me was the fact that he bought his own freedom. That's the thing that really inspired me. He bought his own freedom by trading spices and, of course, selling rum. And with that freedom, he used that freedom not just to prosper for himself, but to help others, to campaign for others in worse positions than he was, as an abolitionist, as a freedom fighter, and then eventually as an author, a writer. Wrote his book, The Interesting Narrative of Olaudah Equiano, which today is still selling online. Even though it's a free book, you can download it for free. But that book went on to actually to inspire politicians in the UK to help with the Transatlantic Slave Act of 1807, which abolished the people trafficking of Africans from the continent into the Americas. So again, just through his determination, through his passion, just for his love of life and love of people. And the book, of course, that helped change millions and millions of people from the late 1700s, early 1800s. And after he died, even then, still inspiring people even today. So a powerful person. And that's just a tip of the iceberg of who Olaudah Equiano was.
You're totally right. It's the tip of the iceberg, right? An extraordinary true story, but also has so much relevance today because Ian mentioned it. Equiano's book was called The Interesting Narrative of Olaudah Equiano. Well, several years later, Frederick Douglass came out with a book of a very similar name. Now, in the US in particular, that's really relevant, right? And if we fast forward even more recently, Martin Luther King Jr., Maya Angelou, all of these people reference Equiano in their work as someone who started a narrative that was so important and that they each have taken influence from. So the idea that we don't know these stories and that the relevance of that to the rum category, actually, this idea of what came before us and how important it is today, I think it's really key that we start to bring some of these stories to life. But what an extraordinary idea that you would teach yourself to read, write, count, and trade. Incredible. I think there's so much in the story that we can all relate to. Firstly, us as founders. And as you said, Gabe, you know, we didn't have the name when we embarked upon this journey. Actually, it was a really happy accident. But there's so much in the story that we can all relate to. Equiano was an entrepreneur. He sold puncheons of rum. He was a really sound business person. With that came a hell of a lot of resilience. To buy your freedom for £40, there's a lot of resilience and a lot of hurdles that you have to overcome. I think there's great bravery in that. And then the idea that he really was one of the first people to, firstly, one of the first African authors to be published and to be published in several different languages in many different countries. And as Ian said, has continued to be true today. But also then to be someone who did the first ever book tour. He kind of was the person that created a book tour into what it is today, which is funny because you could see Ian nodding his head. Ian's about to embark on a book tour of his own. And it's because a man like Olaudah Equiano so many years ago.
Of Ian Burrell, also known as the Rum Ambassador.
Oh, no.
Exactly that. But you know, look, I mean, how the tenacity of that to travel around the country then in the UK, but to travel around the country and to be standing on podiums and talking about the lived experience of enslavement. And by the way, that's a part of this narrative, right? It was the first documented lived experience of what it meant to be enslaved. And that actually had a massive impact beyond what we could imagine today, not least because I think the vast majority of people didn't really understand what it meant. They didn't really grasp what it meant and the experience of these enslaved people. So yeah, I mean, an extraordinary, extraordinary story, a remarkable life and very relevant to us. You know, our rum it starts life in Africa, it goes to the Caribbean and then it goes out to the world. But what a happy accident that
I want to get into that journey in a minute, but it really is, I want to stay on this story for a second because it is such a powerful story. It's a story that is for all of us in a lot of ways. If you think about his journey from Africa to the Caribbean, to the United States, back to the Caribbean, to the UK. I did not learn it. I did not learn about him until several years ago. But think about the impact that this individual had on. I don't think they were calling it then culture, but think about culture now and how you said, Aaisha, impact on individuals in the UK who learned about like Ian in weekend school or Sunday school, or people like Maya Angelou or people like Martin Luther King Jr. who took inspiration from this individual. I mean, he doesn't even know the impact, and most people don't credit him with the impact. And I think that's what's so amazing and so impactful about this story is that you, in a large part, get to introduce through the product, through the rum, through this incredible juice, this incredible story to the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the idea that we don't know these stories is crazy. And I think what we've seen in the US and the UK, but I think in other parts of the world too, we've seen that these stories are starting to come to life, right? People are starting to shed light on these and look backwards in order to look forwards. And I think that's also a really important part of who we are and what Equiano Rum does. Yes, we look backwards at the story of Equiano, but we also do it with a very clear eye on what the future looks like and why it's relevant today. It's not just a story of tenacity and bravery. It's a story of how we should all look to have an impact on the future and what we want the world to look like. You know what, as well, I think what you said earlier is exactly right. It's not a story for one type of person. And I think that's what's so wonderful about the Equiano story. yes, he's an enslaved African. And yes, there are many people that will relate to the narrative and the ideas behind that part of his story. But as I said, he's also an entrepreneur. He was also an author. He was also a freedom fighter. And beyond all of that, I think with all of the stories that we cannot and will not uncover, there is the idea that, you know, some of the struggles and some of the hurdles and some of the things that he went through, they're things that we can all very much relate to. There are so many different parts of his story that are relevant to just all people, just the human experience. I think we're in a very unique but very privileged position to shed light on that story.
I know the brand and the story of Equiano obviously has impacted ultimately the storytelling, but as we said earlier, you all sort of came to know this story. I mean, Ian's known since he's younger, but it didn't really get in large part involved in the brand and the name until you already started working on this. You were already working on the juice and thinking about the first ever African and Caribbean rum, which again, I know everyone who hears that goes, well, what really? Yeah. But I want to get into how ultimately his story has impacted the brand, but I want to talk about the juice and the liquid because ultimately, Ian, you were already thinking about working on a project like this, combining Africa in the Caribbean. And then obviously this story of Equiano fit in perfectly. I mean, it's almost like, you know, it just came at the right time. But you've partnered with two different distilleries, two different continents. Talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of sort of the brand from a liquid perspective and how you thought about creating this unique brand.
One of the things I always talk about when I'm talking about rum around the world is its differences, its nuances. Rum always gets pigeonholed as white rum, gold rum, dark rum. And that pretty much means nothing because you can have different types of white rums, unaged, aged, pot still, column still, cane juice, molasses, all different types of flavor profiles. So I always try to focus on the geography of where the rum is made, because that's where the true value of the product is. And that's where the true value should be. Again, coming from Jamaica, my family, we were part of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the Commonwealth as such. So a lot of products and produce that we produce, the value was taken from it to our colonizers. And that was given there and that was created there. And this happens with a lot of rums. They're taken from various different countries and the value is created in other places. So if you own your own geography, you own your own geographical indication for a spirit, it basically means that you can control your own destiny. You can create your own value. You create your own worth. It's the same as when I'm saying to anyone that works for anybody else, the dream is to work for yourself, to create your own value, not what your boss says. You don't want your boss saying, oh, you're worth this and you're worth that. If you can work for yourself and be independent, then go for it because that's where you create your own value. And that's what a lot of these rum companies want. So when you have someone like Barbados fighting for its geographical indication, they just want the same type of, afforded the same type of privilege as cognac, as tequila, as bourbon. These all have to be made in certain countries. So that's part of the conversation I'm always talking about. So I said, well, why don't we make a rum that has two distinctions, two areas, two geographies, and it gives us a bigger playground. Plus the fact that in the UK, I'm known as a African Caribbean when I'm filling in forms as such. So it's like, oh, it'd be nice to create an African Caribbean rum, especially as the Caribbeans, we make the best rum, but we've been inspired by Africa. We've been taught by Africa. These were enslaved Africans that were making rum when it was first being made in the Caribbean. So it was bringing those two stories together, bringing those two regions together to create something unique. And it's surprising that no one's ever thought about doing that before. And that's the reason why we created an African Caribbean rum. It was then working out which country in Africa or which part of Africa, which part of the Caribbean. Now, fortunately, as an ambassador for the category, I get to work with lots of different brands, different countries, different governments. And in the 54 countries of Africa, Mauritius is one of those countries that has a really good export industry and makes some great quality rum. So it made sense using Mauritian rums initially for our first batches and first blends. And when it came to the Caribbean, it's a little bit more challenging because I'm a Jamaican. We make the best rum in the world, according to Jamaicans. But Jamaican rums can be an acquired taste for a lot of people. And I felt that this brand had to speak to as many people as possible. We wanted to make, as I always say, we wanted to make a rum for the many and not for the few. So if we look at the rums in the Caribbean, the island that's making a lot of noise, making some great liquid, great juice, versatile, is Barbados. And in regards to the story, that's where rum got its name from. Rum bullion, or Kill Devil, alias Kill Devil, that came from Barbados. The cultures of the enslaved Africans and the Europeans and the South Americans coming up from Guyana and to bring their knowledge of distillation, all of that infused together to create rum as we see it today. So Barbados seemed to be the best place, the more appropriate place for us to launch this rum or to create this rum. Then it's like, well, which distillery do we go to? Well, there's only really one distillery. There's two distilleries really you could really go to in Barbados. I didn't think Mount Gay would allow me to buy some of their rum and use in the blend. But what was even harder is trying to go to someone like Richard Seal from Foursquare. But I also know Richard is all about doing the right thing. Even on the side of his warehouses, it says, we do it right. So if he knew the story was going to be good, he knew that we wanted to create quality rum. If we knew we wanted to tell the story of transparency, consistency, and also, more importantly, as Richard said, bringing some or sharing information with distilleries back in Africa so we can empower them, then it made sense. So it was a lot easier to get his blessing than we thought it would be. And after that, it was a case of, right, let's get some samples. And that's how it evolved. And after all that, we still didn't have the name yet. We still didn't have the name. But when you look at it from the outside, you're like, wow, everything tied in together. You started, your rum's going to start in Africa. It's going to go to the Caribbean. America is going to be a big market. You're based in the UK. Barbados, that's where Equiano was first taken. Even in Barbados now, in Bridgetown, they have a plaque there that commemorates Equiano.
Wow.
In Barbados, there's a George Washington Museum, George Washington House, which is now a museum in Barbados, and they have an exhibition there of Equiano. In the art galleries there is pictures and drawings of Equiano in Barbados. And this is, again, before we actually gave the rum the name. So it was a light bulb moment. It was like Equiano looked down at us and said, hey, guys, listen, I bought my freedom selling rum. You guys want some freedom? Put my name on your bowl. And why not?
It's almost destiny in a lot of ways, because it really is the perfect story, to you were already building this. And I love what you said, Ian, a rum for the many and not for the few. Because when I think about the man, the real man, Equiano, he was for many and not for the few. I think right now, correct. Yeah. The UK has sort of adopted him as theirs, but he's for everyone. His story is for everyone, and I love that. And so when you think about, I want to ask Aaisha about sort of, once we've established the juice and you and Richard and the team have really ultimately identified what you liked, how we built the brand. But when you think about a rum for the many and not for the few, how did you go about sort of that profile? And ultimately, I know it's Grays and Mauritius that you partnered with. How did you ultimately think about developing a premium rum for the many, and what was that sort of flavor profile that you were going after?
When I do all these tastings for general consumers, whether they're entry level, whether they're really getting into the category and they understand quite a few brands, or they're geeks which know everything about rum, there are certain flavor profiles that they always adhere to. They love balance, so initial sweetness, a nice bit of wood and oak and some spiciness and some natural fruity notes inside there. So you want a little bit of all of those. You want to try and get the best of all of those, and that normally comes through years of experience of knowing how to distill your rum and having the right stills and using the right barrels and having the right conditions inside there. So it was trying to get a balance that you can have in your glass. And with that glass, you could then use it in many ways. You can just sip it. You could use it in your favorite cocktail where it's not going to get lost. Have it on the rocks. Have it with some water if that's what you want to do. Is a versatile rum. And I actually played around in my kitchen blending rums to try to come up with the perfect blend, and actually use a technique that Richard Seal actually uses, which is you make a rum that you like. And that's it. So I was just making a rum that I liked. I was like, hey, if I like it, other people might like it as well. So yeah, I did a blend, and I remember when we first gave Richard the sample of the blend. It was in a hotel in Paddington, and him and his wife were there, Gail, and I gave the sample. I said, try this, and he sampled it, looked at it, and it was like, yeah. Don't give it your daytime job, Ian.
As the kids say, this isn't it.
Yeah, he knew where I was going. I thought I'd created something amazing, and he was like, yeah. Leave the job to the professionals. But he appreciated it. He understood it, and it was predominantly his rum inside the blend as well. So he knew it was a good attempt from a rookie. Then he created the first blends, the first batch, based on that, blending Foursquare rums with Gray's rums, blending Barbados and Mauritius, ex-bourbon cask, ex-cognac cask. It was a lot of different styles and expressions and profiles all in one to come up with the signature that we call Equiano now.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because obviously we're three founders, and two of us, Amanda and I, don't have the palate and the technical abilities in rum that Ian and Richard do. So the other thing that was really good about this is even Ian's blend that he did, that by the way, he's downplaying, it was pretty good. It's the thing that I tasted that, and I was like, I'm in. That's it. I'm in.
But
I love rum.
But Richard knocked that down real quick.
No, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Richard's good at knocking people down.
But the thing that I think is one of the things that's so great about that blend is, yes, it's technically and how it's been made, and it's Richard Seal, and it's Ian's knowledge of ultimately the consumer and what they like. But the other thing is, for us as two co-founders that are not from the spirits world, it was really important for us that it was what Ian said, it's a drinking rum, right? Super smooth. It doesn't burn. It doesn't taste cheap. It's not oversweet. And all of our SKUs, you can say that of all of our expressions. And that was a big undertaking, but a great thing that they managed to achieve. So great for us, because we just get to enjoy the rum and drink it, and they do all the hard work on making sure that it's all smooth and lovely.
So, sounds like a good deal. I like it. Yeah, I actually love that you bring up the team, because Aaisha, you said not only do we come from different backgrounds, we have a real diversity of thought, and that feels pretty refreshing in the rum industry. So I want you to sort of talk about that diversity of thought, but also once finally Richard approved a few things, and we had a juice that that Ian and the team and you all were incredibly proud of. And you found this incredible story that really fit perfectly, as we said. How do you ultimately bring that to life? How did you think about bringing that to life from a brand perspective, from a color perspective? Because it's so important. You know, it's like when someone looks up on the bar, they're in a store, they're at an incredible restaurant. They're not immediately going to know this incredible story. So how do we bring them in? And how did you think about that?
It's a really, really good question, because if you think, we have this incredibly rich story, which, by the way, you will not fit on a bottle for love nor money. And I'm sure at the time...
There's not enough real estate on the bottle.
Absolutely not. You're not getting it on the bottle, or you've got really small text. So we had this conundrum of, you've got this incredibly rich story that we must tell, but also we've got the reality of the fact that, look, we're a rum. And there are many, many, many rums in the world. And actually, there are very few that we all know. But rum has been around for so long that there's a real consistency, or certainly when we started this project in 2019, there was a real consistency on what rum bottles look like. They're generally of a certain shape. They generally have a paper label. They generally evoke a sense of, or quite explicitly have a pirate ship, or the sun, or tropical trees and palm trees. But ultimately, there's a real consistency in this very, very colloquial sense of what it means to be Caribbean and tropical, right?
Also, a lot of those brands reinforced colonization.
Absolutely.
As well.
Listen, absolutely right. For whether it's from naming or whether it's in the look and feel of how the brand came to be, right? You're absolutely right. But that presents a massive problem because how do you make your bottle stand out? And so we kind of looked at the bottle and thought, right, we're going to put it in a bottle that you wouldn't think is a rum bottle. Arguably, it's more of a premium whiskey, I guess, Ian. More of a premium whiskey bottle. We don't have a paper label. We printed straight onto the bottle. Risky in some regards, great in others. But I think one of the big things for us was, well, how do we still respect the fact that it's still a rum, right? You still want a sense of the tropics and the Caribbean and for us, Africa. And so we had this, at the time, we only had Equiano Original, which is obviously a darker rum. It's a beautiful, deep, rich caramel color. And so we put a palm colored sticker on the top. And I say this because fast forward 4 years and that palm sticker works very well for us. People see it on the back bar and they know the bottle now. But this palm sticker was a bone of contention with all the founders. We were saying from a creative perspective, hey, it's listen, this is us nodding to the tropical senses of what you want from a rum. But Ian is being very quiet, knowing full well that he was a naysayer at the time and wasn't sure about that direction. Fast forward 4 years, it's worked out, Ian, I think.
Yeah, I still remember those conversations. I was like, I wasn't feeling it because being a typical man, I only see 3 colors. See, red, yellow. I think it's red, yellow, and blue. That
nothing else exists.
Women have a broader. That's it. Women can see all the other colors like cyan and palm and all those proper colors, intricate colors. So when Aaisha said, I was like, it's just green, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then she's like, no, it's palm, and I'm like, and the coral for the light and things like that. So yeah, now I'm getting there. I've been educated. My ignorance is starting to wane, and I'm loving it now. So when I go into a bar and I see that little bit of palm just in the corner of I'm like, oh, there's Equiano. We're there.
But it's also, look, you start with the bottle, right? And I joked about it at the beginning, but you can't tell a story as rich as the Equiano story and even really bring to life this idea of what it means to be an African and Caribbean blended rum. There's not that much real estate on a bottle to do it. So I think part of that process of how do you bring this brand to life was, well, firstly, how do we have a bottle that stands out and looks different, at least to the extent that you would be intrigued, but also to the extent that you would keep that bottle in your home, on your bar cart, and you would want it to flourish your space, if you like. So how do we make it a bottle that people want to keep? But also then how do we tackle some of those things and tell the story beyond the bottle? And actually thinking about that at the time of creating the bottle was really key because all of our other marketing efforts became even more important. If you're going to take the risk of having a bottle that doesn't have a paper label and doesn't have all of the other landscape that you can work with, you have a big job to do to bring this idea to life. And those are 2 big things, right? We talked about the liquid, but really explaining to people and educating people on what it means to be an African and Caribbean blended rum, and then tying that to this incredibly rich story. It's a challenge. And what it means is that you've really got to be clear with what your marketing is and how you switch it on. So I think we had 2 big things to overcome with the bottle. It's, how do we get stand out in rum, the oldest spirit category in the world? And then how do you utilize it as a jumping off point? And how do you give the bottle enough things that they're instigators of conversations? Example, on the back of every single bottle, we have coordinates, and each of those coordinates point to a different place in the world. And each of those coordinates and each of those places in the world are a part of the Equiano story that's both relevant to Equiano the man and Equiano our rum. So I think it's also in creating the brand and bringing it to life, it was also understanding who our consumer is and recognizing that we don't have to spoon feed them. They're people that want to go and look at the thing and understand it and go and do the research and find the story and then share that with people. And I think we've been very lucky. I think it's a brand that does get shared with people all over the world now.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for better or for worse, this is a category that is steeped in tradition. But, I love, Aaisha, you said, we believe that we can actively change what the future of rum looks like. Not just the fact that you've got 3 founders who come from very different backgrounds that look different than what traditional, kind of French or English or even sort of white American executives in the spirit space look like. But I think it's so interesting, like, you know, what you're talking about bringing this story to life through the colors and through the bottle. And I can't help but think about what Fawn has done with Uncle Nearest. And you talk about that sharing where people feel a part of that story and want to give a bottle. You know, there's something so interesting. We talk a lot on this show about the fact that a lot of our listeners and individuals like us who are a bit in the know, it's a bit of social capital. You know, people love sharing that, oh my gosh, like, you know, I know this, I want to share it with my community. I want to share it with my tribe. And it's a thing of pride. And that's really how Fawn and the team of Uncle Nearest have tapped into this zeitgeist of culture where people want to be the one to share that story of Uncle Nearest, because everyone knows a bit of the story of Uncle Jack, but they don't know Uncle Nearest. And so I love that becomes an opportunity for you all to tap into culture more and people to say, hey, listen, I got brought in, or I've been interested in this category, but like, let me tell you about this. And then all of a sudden you're building this community that way. And Aaisha, you know, I talk so much about community building, but how do you, from a marketing standpoint, and what have you done already that sort of builds on that story and continues to bring people into this incredible ecosystem that is Equiano?
It's a really interesting question because I think, you know, we launched in 2020. We had the pandemic over much of that period, and we're now well clear of that. But how do you create a community when everyone is stuck in their houses? So where this is a brand that actually, you're totally right, should be a story and is a story that people share very, very proudly, we didn't have that. We were robbed of that for at least a couple of years when we started. And so building that community looked very different. Actually, what we had very early was we built a community online really well. And I think that was in part, that community was in part driven by people that love rum and rum geeks, as Ian referred to them earlier, but then people that found Equiano because they couldn't believe that this was a true story that existed. So I think that online part for us served us really well. And actually, it's arguably what got us through the pandemic. We were selling direct to consumer online and people were able to buy from us, which was great. I think as time has gone on, it's a really fascinating balance because we can create communities. If you look at our brand in the US, DC is a really important place for us. People know the brand. We have certain bars, the Allegory is a great example, that champion Equiano and have loved the liquid and they really understand what we're doing. But the community that exists there might be very different to the community that we have right now in the UK, if nothing else, just for how far we can get in front of those audiences, right? So I think where we started off online, it's then how do you bring the brand to life in lots of other ways? And I think we do that really well through events. I think we do it very well through masterclasses. And I think Ian's so key to this part of it because Ian has that wonderful balance of his rum, as Gabe, as you well know, Ian's understanding of rum and his wealth of knowledge on the history of rum is second to none. That education bit on the liquid, coupled with understanding the story of the man and why it's so important and how we make it relevant to people. Ian goes all over the world for Equiano rum and speaks both the gospel of rum and the gospel of Equiano, the man. So I think that kind of getting in front of people, I think that one of the most powerful things for us as a brand has been exactly what you were talking about that is true for Uncle Nearest, is when you tell people the story, they cannot believe it. And they're so either moved or motivated or inspired by it. So I think the key thing for us in all of our marketing is how do we get that? How do we move people enough that they will always share the story? And then I think on the back end of it, it's also remembering, hey, we're still a rum. Whilst this is a really heavy story in some ways, and we as a brand take on ideas like the history of rum, because it's something that we must be aware of, it's also still a rum, right? You have a great time with rum. People for a long time, people thought of rum when they were on holiday drinking their favorite cocktails. And actually in the UK and the US, we grow up drinking rum. We just don't realize it's rum a lot of the time. You have a rum and coke at a bar and you don't realize that it's rum. And so I think we have that other challenge of making sure that we're always remembering, hey, yes, this is an incredible story. And yes, being the world's first African and Caribbean rum is a real privilege to bring to life. But also, people want to have a great time and they want to drink really good rum. And so in the UK, as an example, we do a lot of events. And I think oftentimes people come to our events and I think they just enjoy the energy. I think what we've done as a team very well is create a vibe and create an energy. And you will never leave an Equiano event not feeling good and happy and connected to the brand. Ian and I hosted a dinner. We launched Omanera, our vintage product, and we hosted a dinner a couple of months ago. And I think we probably talked expressly about the brand and the liquid for far less of the time over dinner than everyone at the table expected. But as a result, what we probably have is a bunch of people around the table at any given time who really understand what we're doing. They're really connected and they go away and they're ambassadors for us just by default of enjoying what the Equiano Rum Company has put together as an experience. And sometimes that's not just talking about your brand and talking about the product. Sometimes it's just giving people a really nice time with good conversation with good people. So it's a combination of different things. But I think where we started online and we had to overcome how hard that was in COVID, now the community is growing and it's a very diverse community. And listen, in all parts of the world, right? We're in the UK and the US, but we're also in 32 other countries around the world. So it's also an interesting thing to navigate with that community looking so vastly different in all of our territories.
Yeah, I think it's almost 5 years ago that Ian and I first connected, and I think I had asked him something about what's the best way to enjoy rum, and he cheekily said, with your friends, of course, but that's kind of that spirit of you do have this incredible story, you have an incredible product, but this is also about the enjoyment of life so much, and I had Shep Gordon on the podcast, and I've said this many times, but he said, we forget that we're simply in the business of kind of making people happy. And that's also the business that you all are in. Yeah. It's to share and help aid in these moments of celebration, sometimes of grief, but sometimes of it's the span of the human experience ultimately, and aiding in being a part of that journey in someone's life. You mentioned your sort of debut, Omanera. You recently announced this vintage rum, which will be the first of a 3-part series. Talk kind of specifically, Ian, a little bit about this vintage and sort of what our listeners can expect from that, but from the other 3 parts, and kind of how you evolve. I have to imagine this is the first of maybe many vintages that you all will put out that just expand upon the story of Equiano.
I mean, well, one of the things that we're seeing in the rum industry are some really exceptional blends being put out by some of the top producers that have great stories, really showcase what rum can be like, and also what's going to give rum its platform that it truly deserves, because it's always been seen as that spirit you drink either on holiday, the cheap spirit you're going to mix with your favorite cola, as opposed to one you can have for a celebration or to show that you've arrived, or even now we're seeing investors investing in rum. So we wanted to really showcase the skills of our blender, and also tell the story of Equiano at the same time. So our first legacy blend, the Omanera, which actually means freedom in Yoruba. Yoruba being one of the most popular languages in West Africa, which is where Equiano was born. There's actually people in Brazil and other parts of the Caribbean that speak Yoruba as well, Yoruba. So it was poignant for us to actually use a West African word and phrase on our bottle, because you see a lot of Latin on spirits out there. Why not a language from Africa on there to express ourselves? So we wanted to call it Omanera, freedom, because we have the freedom to blend, freedom to use different types of barrels and different styles of rums, freedom to create a rum from Africa and the Caribbean. So I challenged Richard again and said, okay, let's get 2 vintages, 2 rums that were not only quite rare at the 2 distilleries, were also made the same year. And we picked 2010 because this was originally going to be released in 2021, but or done around 2021. So we wanted an 11-year-old rum. And again, to tell the story of Equiano. He was 11 when he was kidnapped from Africa and taken to Barbados. So we wanted the rum to be 11 years old minimum. We also wanted to appease some of the, as I mentioned earlier, the rum geeks out there. I always break down the rum drinker into 3 different categories, or 3 different percentages. You have the 1%, which is the rum geeks. They know everything about rum pretty much, and they know the pot stills, the column stills. They know the dress size of the master blender and distiller. They know everything about the rum. They are proper geeks. But they also love drinking their cask strength rums. So rums that are straight from the cask, haven't been watered down, or high proof, high strength rums, just like the high strength cask strength scotches, American whiskies, and other spirits as such. So as Equiano, the original Equiano rums are 43% alcohol or 86 proof. One of the, I would say complaints, but one of the observations from what some of these 1% geeks are, the rum tastes amazing, but why don't you make it stronger? We're like, as I said, this is for the many, not for the few. But we said, well, we can do small batches. We can do small amounts and still tell that story. So I said, well, why don't we do a rum that is 11 years old to talk about Equiano at his age, but also a representation of Equiano when he passed away, when he died, creating and starting off that legacy that we share today. And he was 52 years old when he died. So the rum is 52% ABV or 104 proof. And it's a blend of not only the original ex-cognac barrels and the ex-bourbon barrels, older rums. We've also added a little bit of sherry cask, rums aged in sherry barrels as well, just because a lot of sherry barrels are used to make and to create rum flavors, some of the more premium rums. It also tells the story of Equiano's journey because he did travel around Europe, of course, to the Spanish-speaking part of the Caribbean, although they were English-speaking at the time, and then the war between Spain and England meant that they were trading land between each other. So it tells that story of his journey, but also tells the story of rums. So blending 3 different types of vintage rums as a 2010 vintage, 11 years old minimum, 52% ABV, and a premium in price. There's only 3,000 of these bottles will ever be made. Only 3,000, actually less, because I was in Belgium 2 days ago doing a sampling, and one of the guys brought a bottle out and we finished that quite quickly.
Didn't last long.
There was only 15 of us. Yeah, they didn't last long. And the fact that the bottle was 160, 170 euros a bottle, they were like lapping it up quite quickly. So it's a shame we only had one bottle at a time, but I think we made a few pre-sales just because of the taste of the actual rum. And not to blow any trumpets and praise our blender in what he does, but the rum that he created was judged in the IWSC literally only last week, the International Wine and Spirits competition, and got one of the highest scores ever for a rum, 98 gold outstanding for our first vintage rum. So that's a great honor to bestow our rum, great honor to have. And it really tells, it's just testament to what we want to try and do as a brand. We do want to create a brand that is noble, that will, again, sit with any of the other great spirits that are out there, but also importantly, tell the story of Equiano on his journeys. Further brands and further vintages will have little nods towards his story. If you read his book, there are so many little bits of, I love little cryptic clues, and I love mysteries and things like that. There's so many little places he's been to, or little stories that he tells inside the book that we will connect to a rum and create a rum telling part of that story. So if you do get to read the book, or if it's part of the curriculum like it is in England, when you see a certain Equiano rum brand with a particular name, you'll say, wait a minute, I've actually heard that name before. I've known that. Oh, that's what Equiano spoke about in his book. Yeah, we just want to tell the story, but not spoon feed our guests, because people still want to enjoy themselves and have a good drink of rum, but it's that conversation piece. It's bringing that information to your friends first. It's looking at the Ominaira, the coordinates on the back, and saying, wait a minute, coordinates here are different from the other Equianos. Well, where is this? Discovering where they are, what they mean to Equiano, what they mean to us as people in the 21st century. So yeah, that's the Ominaira. Only 3,000 bottles is a few people have been drinking them since we unofficially launched a few weeks ago. But Yeah, it's been a dream to create brands or rum like that, and we're living the dream now by having not only the Equiano range, but the ability and the freedom to create rums of that ilk.
I love that bits of the story and the legacy that are sort of layered into it. I think you all talk about on your website, this is a journey of discovery.
Yeah,
and you're talking about sort of Equiano, but it's really as consumers, there's little nods.
Yes.
And I love that because it's if you know, and it layers on to what we were saying that, if you want to be the one that informs, the people who don't know. And I think that's a brilliant way to really weave in the story. So I'm excited to see how there's other little nods to his legacy that are infused into the storytelling.
Well, one of the most rewarding things was when I had this guy come up to me and he had the Equiano Light. And on that bottle, we put a journey of enlightenment on there. And he came up and he was like, "You guys think you're clever, don't you?" I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, journey of enlightenment." I'm like, "Yeah, well, what were you getting at? Enlightenment? You mean like the period of enlightenment? Is that like the time when Equiano was living and you had all these scholars?" And he was American, by the way. You had all these scholars and they were talking about
is this your American accent?
Changing the world. Yeah, is it? I got 5 out of 10.
We got to work on it, Ian. We got to work on it a little bit.
I need to work it. Oh man! But he was like, "Yeah, journey of enlightenment," and it was like the period of enlightenment, and the scholars out there, they were talking about this, they were talking about that, and they were like changing the world. They're like, "Well, that's what we want to do with our light rum. It's changing the world. It's a blend of cane juice and molasses. It's not white rum. It's a light rum, lightly aged. And it's, again, a blend of Barbados and Mauritius, Africa, Caribbean. And it's truly a unique rum. But we purposely called it the journey of enlightenment to mean that. And of course, the period of enlightenment was a time where a lot of people were changing their mindset and changing the way they thought about the world, including the abolition of slavery.
I love that. I think that's incredible. Talk a little bit about what it means to be a global brand. We talked about this a few weeks ago. How does that influence how the brand evolves, the markets you head into, but also how you maintain the mission and the authenticity of the storytelling? Because markets like the Caribbean, Americas, the UK, we're very well aware and becoming more aware of some of these incredible stories of colonization and slavery, and it's sort of embedded in our culture for better and for worse. But as you head into new markets, how do you think about that storytelling and how that will attract or bring in your community?
Well, I mean, it's a brilliant question, because this is one of the conversations we've always had in regards to our storytelling. We purposely try not to spoon feed our customers with information. We want them to discover. And each market is a completely different market from each other. So as you said, the history of the United Kingdom, there are similarities to the history of the USA, but we are two different countries. The history of France is similar to the history of Spain, but two different countries. And then you get, for example, to be an international brand, you have to really go across the United States of Europe. So you're getting into areas actually where the word Slav or slave actually came from. You're getting into places like the Czech Republic, or in Chechnya, Slovakia and Slovenia and Latvia. And so you're getting into places where they weren't involved in the transatlantic slave act, but they do know and understand hardship. They do know what it's understand to persecute another human being. They do know about success. They know about strength. They know about being an entrepreneur. They know about being resistant. And these are all things that we can learn regardless who Equiano was, but the man himself was like that. Now, we can tell those stories in a slightly different way, but ultimately we have a rum. And we want people to understand that rum is the main focus. We are part of the story, not the story, just part of the story. But it's nice when you go to places like that where you're not leading. You're not leading so much of this social history of what it was like to be an enslaved African. But you mentioned about Equiano, and the buzzword for them is the entrepreneur, the fact that this guy bought his own freedom. Like, wow, okay, that's just amazing. He wrote a book. Oh, wow, it was amazing. He traveled around the world. He was on a ship with Nelson. Nelson was a 14-year-old boy, and he was on a ship going to the North Pole. He actually helped set up what's called colonies in Sierra Leone, as such. So people will tap into the information or tap into the story in their own way, their own personal way. And some people are just like, you know what? I just want a really good tasting rum. We're fine with that.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, if they just want to find a great tasting rum, hey, look, we got that covered as well. Enjoy the rum, enjoy it. Recommend it to your friends. Because one of the things I did say when we did actually finally have the name, before the name actually came, but once we agreed on the name, is that we wanted to have a person of color, a black man on the bottle, or a black woman on the bottle. And the reason why is because you look at all the brands around the world, and 90% of the brands, I always ask this to bartenders and industry people, I'm like, think of a brand, your favorite spirit, not a wine, a spirit that has a woman on the label. And there aren't many that you can think of. And then I say, right, let's go even further, a person of color on the label. And again, you'd be scratching to find a brand that has that. Wouldn't it be nice in the future that even if you didn't know who Equiano was, in 15 years time, 20 years time, you got into a bar and you're like, yeah, I'll have a rum and Red Bull because I heard that song the other day. What rum you have? I'll have Equiano. Yeah, I'll have an Equiano. They don't know who Equiano is, but they know the rum's good. But they're saying this, they're saying Equiano the same way they're saying Jack Daniels, Jim
Johnny
Beam,
Walker.
Johnny Walker, and every single other spirit out there that is predominantly adorned with a white male on there. So why shouldn't there be a spirit out there that is just as good, just as drunk, or just as beloved as Equiano? And here's the thing. The reason why Uncle Nearest's story is so great is because the story that Fawn and the team tells. But I guarantee a lot of people don't know the story of Jack Daniels, but they still buy it. They still drink it.
They know the name.
They don't know the story of Johnny Walker or Jim Beam. They know the name. Exactly. So would it be nice if we had a brand like an Equiano that, hey, even if you didn't know the name or the story, you just love the product because it tastes good, it looked good, and your friends recommend it to you because they loved the actual rum. But you'll discover the story. And you're like, oh my God, a light bulb moment. I've just discovered this story about this guy, Equiano. I didn't know. I've been drinking this rum for like 2-3 years. Didn't even know he was a real person as such. So as an international brand, we have to look at our target audience and look to see how we get the liquid on their lips, how we market the product in each country, because each country is different. Things are perceived in different ways depending on where you are. And it could even boil down to the color of a bottle. You go to China, you put red on the bottle. You got a good chance of succeeding because red's a really lucky color out there. But you might go to another country, it's like, oh, there's red in the bottle. Oh, no, we can't order that. So yeah, as an international brand, you have to do your research, you have to do diligence and look at each of the markets, and learn. Don't go in there with rose tinted glasses or from a Eurocentric or even American centric point of view into other countries and think, oh, what we say is what you're going to do or how you perceive life. No, go to the country, learn about how people perceive things, how people talk about things, and then see how you can adapt. And that's a strategy I've always used in all my years of traveling around the world as a rum ambassador. And that's a strategy that we're looking to use with Equiano, learning from locals and then see how we can play in their realm with our rum.
I love that. I think it speaks to the diversity of this team. And going back to what Aaisha said, the diversity of thought and really sort of like decolonizing the rum conversation in a lot of ways. And I think, 100%. I don't know how much as a young brand, I know how challenging it is to be a young brand, and congrats on what you all have accomplished, thus far. You really have to be proud, although I'm sure you're steeped in a million things that are going on that you don't always have a minute to think about, but you have to be proud of kind of what you've done. But do you ever think about legacy though too? Because it's like, Fawn and I talked about this, but you're in a lot of ways also giving people And it's sad that this has to happen this way, but like you are giving people permission and the ability to think differently. I was talking to a very famous Mexican chef, Elena Regadas, who has Rosetta in Mexico City. Yeah. And we were debating the conversation of whether the award of best female chef even needs to exist, because some people say, well, why would you need that? And I would argue that it does need to exist, because when she says the amount of young women who come up to her and said, by you having that and being named best female chef, my family now believes this can be a career for me, or I have a space here. And so what Fawn is doing with Uncle Nearest, with Grant Sidney, the investment arm, and also you all are a part of this in such a profound way also, because the lives ultimately that you touch are giving people permission to think differently and think beyond some of these, sadly, traditional frameworks that have been bestowed upon us against our will, oftentimes by culture and by tradition. How do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting question. And there's so many things in that, right? But speaking on the point of legacy first, it's really interesting that you speak about Fawn and Uncle Nearest, because to know Fawn or to listen to her speak about the brand and what they're working on and how they're doing it, that's a real story and a case of someone really finding their purpose and walking in their purpose. Now, actually, with Equiano, I think it's fair to say that it's not a manufactured legacy, actually. We didn't set out to necessarily create a brand that would have this legacy. But what we've had to learn and recognize, as people have told us, is there is a massive opportunity for Equiano, and it will be a legacy brand, but we certainly didn't intend for that to happen. And I think the great thing about that is you then don't have fixed ideas, right? You don't have fixed ideas about what this legacy needs to be. In fact, what we do is allow people to come to talk to us about what matters to them about our brand and why they care about it so much, when the legacy is one that's being built by many people, not just by a handful of founders who have an idea and bring it to life, but when you allow that legacy to take on a life of its own and allow it to go so much further than just one version of the story even, I think it's such a privileged position to be in, but it's a very different thing to walking in your purpose. And I think on the point of, should these things exist, and is it a shame that we have to have awards, for example, for Black owned or BIPOC owned or female or whatever it is? It's really interesting, because to the point of diversity in the founding team of Equiano, I think that when you're being rewarded for doing what you do naturally, then I don't think it's a big problem, right? Sure, I'll take the award, because we're not working hard at trying to be diverse. We just naturally are very diverse, very different people. We have very different life experiences. We come at things from a very different perspective. And that truly enriches not just the brand, but the business and the team and our conversations. And so if someone wants to come along and give us an award and say, well done for that, I think we'll take it because we don't try hard at it. It's just naturally the case that we come from different worlds. And I think the brand and the business really benefit from it.
Yeah, I love that. Just briefly, what can we expect? What can our listeners expect I can't believe I'm saying this. We're heading into the second half of the year, already looking at 2025. Wow. But what can our listeners look out for?
Yeah, we got some new brands and new stories to tell, new juice. We're also looking at what's called other parts of Africa for liquid. I was recently down in Ghana, as well as South Africa, but Ghana was really exciting for me just to be down there, seeing a particular distillery that is just starting their journey on the rum ladder, but quickly making a lot of noise, turning a lot of heads. And we've been proud to actually to be part of that journey because they look at us as like inspiration. And I'm like, wow, you're our inspiration for what you're doing. And this is one of the reasons why we created our brand, is to work with people like yourselves. But they look at us and said, no, you were out there doing it. You're opening the doors and making it easy for us. I suppose it goes back to the Mexican chef you were speaking about. It's a case of people will look at us and they'll say, well, if you're doing it and you look like us, then why shouldn't we be able to do that as well? So for me, it's a two-way street. It's about learning and then sharing. So look out for some liquid coming from different African countries, all from sugarcane, and of course, other parts of the Caribbean to be blended to tell the story of Equiano. Of course, it'll all be done at our home in Barbados, because that is our spiritual home there. But it doesn't mean we can't bring in rums from other parts of the Caribbean and other parts of the world to be blended and bottled at Foursquare. So yeah, some exciting new brands to come as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because it means I get to travel more. If I could travel more, I get to promote my book.
Not enough airline points.
That's it.
Yet,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah. I get to promote my new book as well, which talks about rum from all over the world at the same time, and tells that rum story from a really refreshing, easy, digestible way. Because rums it can be a category that's really hard to navigate because there are so many different styles and so many countries that make rum out there. So I try to make it simple for everyone that hopefully will be reading that book to understand rum's journey, where it was in the past, where it is today, where it's going in the future, and a few rums inside there, including Equiano. So it was some really great tasting rums, more of the legacy blend, the new legacy blend we're working on as well, and a couple others that we can't really talk about at the moment, but they are. But once
this is a safe space,
exactly.
Guys. This is a completely safe space.
You say nobody listens to you, Gabriel?
Yeah.
We got some new juicy rums to unleash to the world, coming in 2025, 2026, and beyond.
Ian, Aaisha, what's a life lesson you can leave us with?
Oh, Aaisha, what's the life lesson?
I'm a lot younger than you, Ian, so I think you should go first because you've had longer to have good life lessons.
Wow, you're really going to call him out on the mic like that?
She's basically saying I'm wiser.
That's exactly. I'm glad to see you understand my compliment. It's exactly what I was saying. Wisdom, Ian.
Yeah, it's too many. It's too many. I've got so many. Where's things like be yourself? That is so important. It's also a detriment to me because it means that I don't have, besides having physical brands, I am my own brand, which means that's another reason why I have to travel, because I have to be in certain places to do my presentations, do my talks. But one of the reasons you can actually say exactly the same things as I do, as I say, but it will never be done in the same way as me, because I'm me. Everyone should be themselves, individuals, be passionate about what they do, and be truthful about that. I love quotes, and when I first heard this quote, I was like, that's got to be my strap line. It was from Confucius, and it was find a job that you love, and you never have to do a day's work. And that was me when I called myself a rum ambassador. I didn't think it was a job. I love doing what I do, working with rum, working in the category, learning, sharing, trying to elevate what's called the rums and the industry back home in the Caribbean. So yeah, found something I love. So I haven't done a day's work in years.
It's a good one. I'm still working on that and trying to figure out how I basically just become Ian. Got to create a name, a title, and just convince everyone.
We're all working on that right now,
I think mine is actually a lesson that I've had to learn for myself. And that is that you are who you tell yourself you are, right? It's such a powerful thing, but we are who we tell ourselves that we are. And I think it's true in life as true as it is in our work life. In your life, I think there's many things that can happen that come up and that wobble you or that change your viewpoint on the world or what you might believe of yourself. And it's so important to have that, to find that self-confidence and to back yourself. And that's also true of anyone who goes on the kind of journey that we're on. Yes, with Equiano, but any business where you're really going out alone. And there will be many naysayers and there will be many people that tell you that you can't do it like this or you shouldn't do it like that. And that sense of having to trusting your gut is so incredibly valuable. Trusting your gut and backing yourself. And I think so much of that comes down to, well, you have to believe the person that you are when you sit in front of people in the first place. You can't let the world tell you who that is. You have to believe that you're capable of doing the thing that you set out to do. You have to believe that you're going to get to the end point. And yes, there'll be some troubles. And yes, it'll require some resilience, but you'll get there. So for me, it's And as I said, it's a lesson I've had to teach myself, right? You are who you tell yourself you are. Believe in yourself, back yourself, and trust your gut.
I love that. I'm grateful to have the both of you a part of this On the Pass community that is growing globally. I'm proud to be a part of the Rum family as well, as Gail Seal says it. And really excited for this episode and continue to be a disciple of the Equiano brand.
Gabe, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Much appreciated. And yeah, thanks for being part of the family.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. On the Pass is hosted and produced by me, Gabriel Ornelas, and edited and mixed by Dylan Agajanian, with original music by Dylan Agajanian.